Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The show's about to begin. Andrew, let's put on a show.
Where am I starting from? You didn't tell me we were going to have a whole introduction thing.
Just go with the flow. Let's put on a show.
Fine, let's go for it.
Today we have a special guest on the show, Andrew Elliott, who is the Director of Commercial for Chestertons MENA. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Silvia. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure to have you on as the first commercial guest. And it would be, it's fitting because you're probably one of the OGs of commercial.
Definitely getting that way.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say there's probably 3 of us, maybe 2 of us these days, who have been in the market for probably close to 20 years now.
There you go.
And yeah, you can see by the grey hairs and the few creases around our eyes.
Well, actually, it's funny you should mention that because I had Nathan Kearney on the show the other day and we were talking about why residential agents should perhaps consider moving into commercial. And I made a few statements which were probably misconceptions. And our friend Angela ripped me a new one when she heard it. I was like, oh, commercial real estate, it's B2B, so you get your work-life balance because nobody's doing viewings after 6 o'clock. You get your weekends back because no one's viewing offices or retail on the weekends. It's a lot easier to put together the deal. There's no emotion involved because it's not home. It's not such an emotional transaction. And she was like, you have no idea.
And I hate to say it, but I'll agree with Angela on this front. And I have to say that while we do get the work-life balance that people claim, I can guarantee there's landlords messaging me at 8, 9 o'clock at night. They message on Saturdays and Sundays. You've got landlords that are in the USA or Europe and they don't think of times, and WhatsApp these days is so or easy to contact you that they just send messages
whenever,
not thinking where or what time it is. You do get the balances in 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 is typically viewing time. You do get that sort of time as your working day because obviously companies aren't going to want to do business outside of their business hours. Yeah. So that's one of the great sides of commercial. The fees is another side of the commercial that obviously we tend to get a lot higher fees. Deals, while on the residential side, I'll say it's a decision of the heart. In commercial, it's very much a decision of the finance manager.
Right.
And trying to get money out of finance managers, I've learned over the years, is probably the hardest part of doing a deal. And the other thing that we struggle, I wouldn't say struggle with, decisions aren't necessarily made in Dubai.
Right.
You might be dealing with the Dubai office. They typically have to report to a head office somewhere. Head office will make a decision based on what they think is right, not on what the employees want in Dubai. And I've had that many a time where they've sent over a head of real estate from somewhere when a company have chosen a premises and then gone, we think our head office should be here. Right. And you start the whole process again and you think, I thought he was just coming to sign it off. And there you are 6 weeks later, still doing more viewings, looking for the perfect office space for them.
Having to start again from scratch.
Yeah.
So I really want to, you've mentioned a lot in that little intro, commissions, the emotions, the different decision makers, which can make life really difficult. So in this episode, we're really going to dive deep into what goes on behind commercial real estate. But first I want to start with you and your personal journey, because you had an interesting, you were a pro golfer.
I was back in the day. I came out here, I was in a car accident in 2000 in the UK. Couldn't play a lot of golf. So the first thing I wanted to do was get into the sun. I was fed up with the rain. I was fed up with teaching golf in the wind and the rain in the middle of, I was actually in Devon and Somerset. So the lovely part of the world, but not necessarily the metropolis of the world. Yeah. Came out here as a teaching pro. I was based in Abu Dhabi teaching golf. And then you experienced teaching golf in July, August, September and thought... Well, I was lucky because I also got to go and play golf in Europe in the summer. So quite often I'd go and play European development tours. So I'd be away for 6 or 8 weeks, come back and then obviously start playing golf again or teaching golf in September right through till sort of April and May. And I came back from Germany, I think in 2005, and I was just fed up with thinking I could stand here all week and teach these people, they're never going to play golf. And a friend of mine was like, you'd be great selling real estate. And I was like, not convinced about this, don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to go and travel. He pestered me a bit more. And I think at the time, my sales director slapped down an Excel spreadsheet and said, this is what my agents are going to earn this month. If you can afford not to work for that, then you must be mad. And I looked at the numbers, and I don't think there was a number under 100,000 dirham commission. And as a 20, what was that at the time, probably 30 years old, looking at people earning 150,000 dirhams, I was thinking,
tax-free.
I think I need some of that. And there was a very quick decision from there. And literally, I think like 2 weeks later, I was selling an off-plan project at the time, which has never actually been built. So I got paid a lot of money for it. And we still haven't built the project.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
I won't say the
It's all
project because there might be people on there lynch me later.
Yeah, like, oh, that's him. From how many years ago was that?
Yeah.
17 years ago. Okay. So that explains how you got into real estate, but then how did you get into commercial? Because
so again, I had one of our last projects was one of my last projects was a off-plan commercial property, and I was the only person to transact in it. And at the time, we had a sales director called Billy, and she took me for a walk one day and said, "You're going to commercial." And I was like, "Well, what do I know about commercial?" And she said, "Don't worry, you're going to learn. You'll work it out and you'll learn it." And I was like, "Well, this seems a bit strange." So she sort of gave me 3 months and said, "You can go to commercial for 3 months. After that, I'll transfer you to any department you want in the business." And obviously at the time I was in Better Homes. So I thought, well, that's not too big a sway. Little did I know we had signed an exclusive agreement on a building in Business Bay called Bayswater. So we were exclusive marketing and sales for that. And obviously at the time, that was probably the best thing I ever did, because we had that property. My first 2 or 3 deals were full floors, half floors. Wow. And 3 months later, she called me for lunch and said, "So which department are you moving to?" And I was like, why am I moving departments this time? I thought I was doing quite well. And obviously she said, "I told you if I put you in commercial, you'll be fine." Yeah. And I'm still in commercial. Yeah. So.
And what do you think she identified in you that?
She couldn't find anybody else to do it. No, not at all. There was 5 or 6 of us at the time, and we all went into commercial. We'd all been doing sort of larger transactions on the residential side anyway. Very well connected people in Dubai, and touch wood, we were probably the first commercial sales team, because we did have a commercial leasing team already. And at the time, Business Bay was just being launched. Wow. So our focus really was Business Bay.
Okay. And can you tell us about your journey to becoming a director in commercial? Because, you know, when you're successful in real estate, people tend to stay as an agent, don't want to deal with the headache of managing teams or reporting to management. I was
sort of corralled into it, I would like to think. I'd been an agent, obviously. I'd turned down management positions because I didn't really think it was me. I always sort of thought I liked the idea of sell a quick building. Wouldn't say I sold loads of them, but I had a fair attempt of selling them. And I got to the stage that at the time I was in CRC, I was the only agent in Marina, and they kept trying to push agents onto me. We need more agents, your end of town, why don't you take them on? And that's where it started. Ben and Rick both basically managed to persuade me to take a few agents. They got successful. Then they were like, take a few more and take a few more. And before you knew it, I had effectively, I think when I left, 34 agents.
And, you know, commercial real estate is often misunderstood. And I do want to go into the detail of some of the differences, but what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about this vertical in real estate?
I think the biggest problem is people have this pre-concern that commercial's difficult. And unfortunately, it's not difficult, it's a process. You can't just walk in, see a property and somebody's going to make a decision and take it. You know, you don't get that quick turn in a deal like you do in residential. A husband and wife can walk in, see a property and they're like, oh my God, this is perfect. We'll put a deposit down now. Commercial, they're always going to go away. They're going to do the numbers. What's their expansion for the next 5 years? What's their growth? Do they need the space? How much space do they need? Is this going to take into their growth for the next 3 years or 5 years? So, you know, there's a lot more planning involved, which we're not necessarily involved in. And that's more so on the office space. On the retail space, obviously, it comes down to demographics. It comes down to location. It comes down to visibility. It comes down to what the space offers. Is there views? Is there not views? So, you know, you look at very different things to the residential market. And I think dealing with some of the larger corporates that we get to deal with and the decision-making process, you're dealing with, I want to say, serious people. You're not dealing with time wasters. It's unusual that commercial people come to you and say, this is our requirement, and they're just wasting your time. I think we do get a lot of people in Dubai who are quite happy to go and look at apartments. They've had a tough day on the beach. They've got a bit sunburnt, and going and looking at some real estate for the afternoon sounds like a lovely idea. And I think we've all been through that process in real estate, especially for us. We get it at the end of shows that have been at the World Trade Center, and suddenly people start inquiring, going, we're going to open an office in Dubai. Wow. I'm getting on a plane at 7 o'clock. What can you show me by 7 o'clock? And you're like, funny, that's Friday afternoon. When are you coming back? And when's your trade license going to be ready? Yeah. And very quickly you realize that they are literally killing a couple of hours because the show's over.
And so under commercial, you've got office space, which is probably the biggest slice of the pie.
It's office space is definitely the largest portion of the market.
And then retail would be next. Then industrial, warehouses.
So I mean, I sort of break it into sort of 5. You can really go deeper and go into 6 assets. But your first asset is probably office space, retail showrooms. You then go into warehouses. You go into staff accommodation. You then can go into land. And you then go into commercial villas if you want to break it down even further. But
you ever seen a labour camp?
Sorry?
Have you ever seen a labour camp?
I've done deals in labour camps. I've leased labour camps. I've sold labour camps. I know there's a big misconception about labour camps. I've been in labour camps where there's cinemas. I've been in them with basketball courts, washing machines.
That was not my experience.
And I've been into labour camps that honestly, I wasn't sure my shoes should be touching the ground. And
that was my experience.
The smell and the cracks in the wall. I've experienced them all, been there, done it.
And do you have a preference to, for me personally, I think I most enjoy retail because there's more involvement when it comes to actually then you're speaking more to the mall management and trying to get the right fit for them. It's not just a case of we'll take anyone on. There's got to be a right fit for them.
And definitely with retail, it's understanding the concept. It's understanding what the concept requires. Malls are very specific about obviously not cannibalizing other concepts.
Right.
If you look at street retail, again, you've got landlords who will quite happily take anything, and you end up with 3 salons next to each other, and you think, well, who planned that out?
Yeah.
One of them's not going to survive very long. So there is a lot more strategy behind retail. I think the retail market in Dubai is probably at the moment one of the strongest in the world. When I was in London a couple of weeks ago and you look at the high street in London, it's been decimated.
Yeah, but that's all that work from home, remote working, also co-working spaces. Like, there are a lot of threats to the commercial
There is, there is, and there has been, and I think it will continue. I mean, I look at e-commerce, and I mean, before COVID in Dubai, e-commerce wasn't really a thing. Amazon had just sort of broken into the market. And I think you look at where e-commerce came during COVID, every brand in Dubai Mall basically opened an online shop. Warehousing requirements just after COVID went through the roof because they all needed space to do all these shipments from. I think if you then look at the rest of the retail market, you then started going to cloud kitchens. So your people like Deliveroo started setting up cloud kitchens where food was being delivered from a central kitchen. I mean, there's many around Dubai at the moment. So, you know, there's been a huge change in the retail industry. And what amazes me still today is you drive around the Dubai Marina, the retail shops are full. The JLT retail shops are full. Try and find any of the small community malls, and there's bidding wars on these retail spaces. Dubai Mall at the moment, prices are going up so quick because there's such demand for retail. And yet you think, how is this not in London, New York, Paris? Retails are empty. And yes, people are spending more time online shopping. I think delivery services have got so much better. But I sort of think, at what stage do retail shops start to become experience centers? Because people are going to want to try stuff on. They want to feel it. They want to touch it. You don't get away from that when you're buying something, do you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you look at Unas, for example, it will deliver within 2 hours. And try it on at home.
And send it back.
And send it back if you don't like it. So, you know, I like that saying, experience centers.
Well, I sort of think, I mean, if you could go into the mall and try on, like you say, Eunice, try on 5 or 6 items, place your order even in the shop, a little bit like IKEA.
And have it delivered to your
it delivered to your house. You're not walking around the mall with 53 bags. By the time you get home,
which actually stops you from shopping more when you reach your capacity of.
And I think that was something that was tipped very heavily 2 or 3 years ago, where big malls were going to be moving towards experience centers. I mean, I'm amazed. You go into some of the malls now and we've got cars for sale. I mean, Tesla's opened some. I know there's another brand, I think, in Mall of the Emirates at the moment, where there's cars in the mall, and you can go and touch, feel the car and purchase your car. And that, I think, is part of the experience that malls are trying to get away from sort of just retail.
So you've got, a booming commercial market at the moment. What do you say you're at? 94% occupancy?
I would say between 94 and 95% in office space. I think retail's probably a very similar number. And I hate to say it, but industrial warehousing these days is also very high. I mean, we've had no new sort of mega industrial parks opening. People are building industrial. Transactions are going on very strong. Lease rates have gone up. And I think there is just generally a demand for everything commercial at the moment in Dubai.
And how does the supply fit into that?
That's another story. And that's a story I talked to many developers about 2 or 3 years ago, saying, we're not going to have any commercial space in a couple of years. You want to try and secure yourself a piece of land. I think the rates for commercial have been so low for so long, it's not made sense. You've also got quite a few big landlords sitting there going, I've had commercial for so many years, and this is the first time I've reached full occupancy. Do I want to go down that risk? Whereas I have a residential building and I run at 90, 95% occupancy as long as I get the pricing right. But also, you've got to think that the government at some stage is going to have to introduce more office space. To continue to grow the economy, we're going to need more industrial, we're going to need more office space. And whether that's building new zones or creating new business parks or creating more free zones, I'm not sure which way they will go. But we don't have any new office space. And if anybody starts building today, it's going to be 2028, 2029 before that hands over. And where are we going to go for the next 3 to 4 years to get office space?
Do you think they could maybe perhaps pause the visa allocation linked to the office space?
The Dubai economy would be doing too well out of what's going on at the moment to want to pause anything. And I think it will either naturally peter out, in which case we'll find a happy balance. But obviously costs go up so much, Dubai then becomes inhibitive for people to actually operate from here. And they start looking at other countries to operate from. And once that happens, you tend to find there's a trickle away from Dubai. It's too expensive. We can't operate there. And that's why we need the balance, really. Whereas if we could get office space back down to sort of 80% occupancy, we've got room to grow. And I think, I mean, there is 2 or 3 developments under construction at the moment, but we're only talking about just over 1 million square foot to hand over.
So in that case, if I'm a residential agent or off plan, I'm thinking of switching into commercial, doesn't sound too enticing if there's like low supply, high demand. How many agents are there working on this low supply? I
think if you look at agents in the commercial market, there is some that are doing very, very well. The ones that are applied, they've got a database, they've worked for long enough in the market. There is always deals to be done. There is always somebody looking to lease something out. There's always somebody looking to sell. There is always businesses failing. There is always people looking for a bigger space. So there is transactions. Yes, there is less transactions. How many agents are doing commercial? I joke about this regularly. There's probably 50 that do it properly. There's probably 500 trying. And when I say 500 trying, security guards become agents in a good market. The landlords typically try and set up their own real estate companies to lease out space. And you tend to find that there's a huge amount of residential agents who pick up listings along the way, who don't really understand how the commercial market works, don't understand the licensing of the market. But they've just sold a guy's villa on the Palm and he says, I've got some office spaces I'd like to sell or I'd like to lease them out. And they're like, yeah, I can look after them. But the fact that they don't have the understanding of the commercial market, those listings sit for 2 or 3 months. And the landlord's like, well, I'm giving them a chance. They really sold my last property. And in today's market, those agents will do a deal because there is no space. So they fall into a commercial deal. I wouldn't say they're commercial agents.
And what would you say differentiates a residential agent to a commercial agent? So if you had someone who was in residential, what signs would they need to show or demonstrate for you to say you'd be good in commercial?
I tend to find that commercial agents, the better ones, are a little bit more mature. They come from a sort of business sales background. They understand the process of making a decision.
Right.
You tend to find a lot of residential agents are quick, hungry. They want to do the deal today, close the deal, move on to the next one. Commercial, you build a pipeline, and that pipeline continually ticks over where you're closing deals. But it's building that pipeline and keeping it filled. People aren't going to make decisions in a day, 10 days, maybe even 2 weeks. And a lot of our deals go into the months, hence why we have higher fees.
So patience is number one.
Patience is the biggest thing in commercial.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you have commission breath, commercial is not for you, right?
And I say this to all my agents: if you're thinking of getting to commercial, you need to have a minimum of 6 months backing behind you. Residential, they sort of get away with 2 or 3 months, but in commercial, unless you've got that staying power, by the time you build a pipeline, you're going to be like, oh, I've got no money left. But when the deals do happen, I mean, we typically get a landlord fee for leasing and a tenant fee.
Well, you mentioned that commissions vary. So can you go into detail about?
Typically we charge, I mean, commercial, most I think are charging between 7 and 10% now for the tenant side.
Right.
If you look at the commercial or the landlord side, a lot of landlords pay us between sort of 3 and 7, 3 and 8%. Every now and then there is buildings that come out, they want to get the building filled, they'll go up to 10. I mean, I've had 12% landlord fees before. The great thing as well on the sales side is because there's so few agents, we don't get that competitiveness on fees.
Right.
So you tend to get 4%, so 2% seller, 2% buyer on the commercial side. Whereas in residential, you guys fight for 2, 2.5%, 3%. We tend to get that 4% commission, which obviously when you do that deal, the commissions are quite a bit higher and you think, that's all right, I've got another month or 2 to play before I do my next deal.
And do you get away with, let's say, I mean, with most commercial leases, very unlikely someone's just going to sign a 1-year lease. They sign 3.
You typically
5.
find a lot of them, and it's strange because in today's market with the prices going up as much as they have done, I would have thought clients would have signed longer term leases. We didn't see that this cycle. And I don't know whether a lot of people were still sort of skeptical of, is the market going to come back? Is COVID going to come back? Are we going to be in a position that we've committed to a 3 or 4 or 5 year lease and now the market's changed and we're stuck in it? So we didn't see it this cycle as much as we did previous cycles. A lot of people locking in leases at a very low rate. However, you tend to find that the land department doesn't want us to charge on multiple tenancy contracts or multiple year tenancy contracts.
Oh, they don't?
They don't.
Okay.
So
they do in Abu Dhabi, no?
They do. Agents at the moment, because the market is quite tough, people are going for longer term leases. Agents are trying to get longer term commissions out of them.
Okay, makes sense.
And if you look in the rest of the world, a lot of people would have a slab. So 5% first year, 4% for the second year, 3% for third year. So, you know, it is that incentive. And it's the landlords that would be paying that. So they're incentivizing the agents to push for longer term leases.
And what would you say are some of the harsh realities that a newcomer into commercial would need to be aware of?
The biggest thing is understanding all the licenses to start with.
Tell us a bit about that.
We have 2 main licenses in Dubai. So you have a free zone license and you have your Dubai Economic Department license or your LLC license. However, within the free zones, we now have, I think, 32 free zones to operate from. So a client looking at moving to Dubai is looking at all of these free zones. We quite often start speaking to clients before they've selected a free zone. And they get you running around a free zone. They're looking at all the office spaces. They're making offers. And you find out that they're doing that in 2 or 3 different free zones. And there's nothing more frustrating that you've negotiated a deal and they go, oh, but we've signed a deal in Silicon Oasis. And you're like, hang on, we were looking in Media City. We were looking in, you told us you had a Media City license. You know, that's one of the frustrating parts. And I think you sort of think a company would have an idea of where they're going before they start spending time looking for an office space. And that's a frustration. The other thing, obviously, agents, there's VAT in commercial. So it's understanding the taxation. We now have corporation tax. Not that it affects us at the moment, but on our landlord side, obviously a lot of them are affected by corporation tax, as well as obviously VAT in all of our transactions.
And that's a risk that Blue Waters agent whose landlord gave them an office space, they wouldn't necessarily know that they've got to charge VAT.
And
you
negotiate a deal, and there's nothing worse going back to a tenant and saying, oh, by the way, and there's 5% VAT, and he's like, well, hang on, I've done all my sums and that wasn't included.
That wasn't part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, also matches your commission. So how about I just don't pay your commission?
Yeah. And the worst part is agents forgetting to add commission to their, VAT to their commission, and then they sit there and work out, hang on, where's all my money gone?
Yeah. And on selling as well. And
so in commercial, obviously, if a landlord is VAT registered, most of them would be charging VAT on it. So the sale of the property, there is 5% VAT. And then obviously on the leasing value, there is 5% VAT.
Okay. And let's talk about Chestertons for a bit, because it does have a strong reputation globally.
I think you started in Chestertons.
Maybe 22 years ago. So, yeah, I've got like a deep connection to the brand.
That's how I got on the show first today.
Yeah, it's like a proper like heritage brand, Chestertons.
Yeah. Well, we're 225 years old. And I mean, that was obviously one of the things that when I moved to Chestertons, one of the biggest things as well is they've got a huge valuation business that people don't really know about. Right. We have property management, we have short-term rentals, residential leasing, commercial sales and leasing. We also have building consultancy, which is project management side. And we have an office in Riyadh. We have obviously an office in Dubai. We have an office in Abu Dhabi that does valuations. And at some stage, I'm sure agency will move to Riyadh when the freehold laws change. And I'm sure they will change soon. So Chestertons in Dubai, it's not just a normal real estate company that we have with a lot of the local agencies. We're sort of a little bit more along the lines of a JLL, CBRE, Knight Frank, maybe not quite that level. We sort of sit probably between the two levels. We're not in 250 countries like JLL or CBRE. Currently, I think we're in 22 different countries, London being probably our biggest with 33 offices. And that's more of a residential market in London that we have. But Dubai, we've got pretty much the building consultancy side, project management, valuations, agency side. And that's obviously one of the big draws for me to move there.
Yeah, and I suppose like that, you know, currently at the moment with a lot of real estate agencies, there's difficulty to differentiate the offering. Yeah. But when you've got these core services, that naturally turns into lead supply.
Well, it does, because on the valuation side, I mean, we do a lot of industrial valuations, and obviously we then get the landlords on those. We do any valuations for residential. We've got that database of who owns those properties. It can then be turned into a contact for a sale or for a lease. So, you know, that brings on the leads or the listings onto our portals. The big thing for me, and I think we will start to see this more so in Riyadh, is once we start developing buildings for owners and we're project managing, we're in the process that we take the maybe do the feasibility on the plot. We then decide to build a residential commercial building. We then manage that whole process, and it then comes to agency or property management at the end. Right. So hopefully we take the whole suite of services through from sort of A to Z.
And is there anything else that you'd say would differentiate you from the other?
I think that's our biggest differentiation, and I don't think there's anybody or many companies in Dubai that offer that full suite. And I'd say the first three that I mentioned already, there might be one or two others, but we're sort of in a little bit of a niche part of the market that we don't have a huge amount of competition at the moment.
And there's a lot of private offices opening up. Any
there is a lot of private
office?
We I serve quite a few private offices which have come through the valuations where we've done portfolio valuation work. So we serve quite a few of them. We've set up residential agency only a year ago. We are still growing that side of the business. We need to develop that a bit further, I think, before we get into private office. But I'm on the commercial side, not the residential side.
All right, brilliant. Okay, and let's go to education and personal development for a commercial agent.
I mean, I educate my agents a huge amount. I mean, I'm doing stuff sort of most days. I do something with them, learning experiences. The other thing with commercial is we get so many, I want to say trials and tribulations in deals that you're learning something all the time. And it's something that I will bring up with the agents and say, this has just happened. What do you think the answers are going to be? And this is what actually happened, and this is how we do it. So sort of more case studies. So you tend to learn a lot more on the job in commercial, and you tend to find, because you're dealing with tenants who understand their side of the procedure, you learn a lot more from that, especially on the retail side. And you touched on retail earlier. But when you're dealing with companies that are looking to set up should I say, a brand across Dubai where they're going to have 20 or 30 different outlets, and understanding the logistics of it and central kitchens and understanding the power supplies, the gas lines, the sort of evac of smells out of the kitchen, you look at that and you think, yeah, there's a huge amount of commercial real estate to understand. It's not just an apartment.
Yeah. And what do you think, like, how do you see the commercial market evolving over the next few years with like AI and working from home and remote working and co-working spaces?
I know working from home obviously in Europe is still a big thing. I think in Dubai it's something we're not seeing that much of. One of the parts in a lot of the free zones is to get your visas, you actually need to have a specific size of square footage. So in JLT, you've got to have 100 square feet per visa. Right. So if your company's paying for 10 visas, they need 1,000 square foot. If you're paying for 1,000 square foot, you might as well have your staff in the office. And I also think that Dubai did very well after the sort of pandemic, where a lot of people got back into the office very quickly. So they didn't get into a routine of, well, I work from home 3 days a week and I'll come to the office 2 days a week. And I think that working from home, I don't think you get that sort of mix of what goes on in the office on a daily basis. Relationships suffer if you don't have a relationship with a colleague and you're trying to get something done. Whereas if you're seeing each other every day, you have that relationship with them. So I think companies are starting to see that. You've seen some of the big American tech companies forcing their staff back into the offices because they're not getting the creativity between their team members. They're not coming up with the ideas because they're working from home. And I think that's going to play out in these countries for the next couple of years. But I also think employers are now sitting there going, or employees are sitting there going, actually, I'm going to determine what I want to do and I'm going to tell you how I want to work. And for companies to attract top talent, they're also in that position that they're negotiating, saying, well, I want to work from home on a Friday. I don't want to be in the office. And companies are having to be. So I think COVID actually changed the working environment. Where it goes in the next 10 years, I'm quietly confident people are going to be back in the office.
Okay. And what would you, I mean, I know for residential, there's some killer questions that you can ask a buyer or a tenant, but that conversation is probably very different for a commercial lead. So what are your killer questions that you like to ask?
Somebody buying commercial is normally a little bit more sophisticated buyer. They're looking at it for yields. They're looking at it for returns. They're probably going to the bank, leveraging quite a bit of money to buy commercial real estate. So you tend to find that it's what is their type of asset they're looking to buy? Is it retail? Is it offices? People buy retail because they get a 5-year tenant, they get a 7-year tenant, and once a retail shop is established, they're not going to move out. So people like retail for that reason. People buy office space knowing that they'll probably find a blue chip tenant who will sign a 5-year contract and pay one check, and they don't have to worry about, do I have to chase them for the rent payment? Is the check going to bounce? When you're dealing with a global, it's unusual that your checks bounce. So you tend to find that company or investors that are looking for those sort of assets are looking at the stability with a tenant. Residential, you can have a new tenant every year in Dubai. And unfortunately, each time you've got to pay agency fees, you can have a bit of downtime. Commercial, you tend to find you don't get that downtime because you'll sign a 5-year lease and you probably don't really hear from the tenant for 5 years' time because we have post-dated checks. A lot of them are pushing for bank transfers these days. And if you're getting your bank transfers, you don't hear from the tenant in 5 years.
And what would you say? Because like, I definitely think commercial investors are slightly bit more savvy than the
Definitely they're looking at yields. Definitely they're looking at returns. They, like I say, they understand that they're probably going to have to give 3 months rent-free fit-out because there's going to be a fit-out period. But once that's in place, once that tenant's committed to spending 1 million dirhams on a fit-out or 2 million dirhams on a fit-out,
they're not going anywhere.
There's no way they're going anywhere for the next 4 to 5 years, if not 10 years. And, you know, you've got that peace of mind that you're not chasing a unit. The other thing with commercial investors, you tend to find there's a lot less can go wrong in an office space. If you fitted out the office space as a tenant, pretty much anything goes wrong, it's on you, isn't it? So the landlord doesn't have maintenance issues. Yes, he gets a slightly higher return. Yes, he has a tenant that pays him rent on a yearly basis and pays or signs a contract for 5 years. He doesn't have to deal with that tenant for 5 years.
So there you go, top tip.
Top tip, commercial real estate is the way forward.
Of course you would say that, but you know, there's very valid reasons why. And what would your top tip for, because I know you mentioned, there's a lot of people that are looking for commercial property. They don't necessarily have, they might not have done the right homework beforehand. So what would your top tip or best advice be for?
I think anybody who's buying commercial is understanding the yields and also understanding the location. We've had a huge push from tenants, I think, over the last sort of 7 or 8 years about accessibility to metros. It's understanding how staff will get to the office space. It's understanding what's being offered around that office space. If you went out to Kudra today and built a load of office space, you probably struggle to rent it because there's no accessibility. The roads are there, but there's no trains, there's no bus routes out there, and it's going to struggle. Whereas residential, people happily drive out there, live in their villa and come into town. The commercial corridor still predominantly is Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai. And I sort of feel with Dubai Hills, they launched a load of commercial space. It struggled at first. It's done well now that we've got no office space available. But I do think unless a metro line comes in soon, when there's a down market, that potentially could become vacant.
Okay. And
location
is the important part. And any heads up on where these metro lines are going to be?
Well, we keep hearing different rumors. The next line I think is being built at the back of Al Warsan, so International City, Silicon Oasis, places like that. I sort of feel that we could really do with one that runs down Sakim Road to connect all of the villa communities that have come out there. And then that could then maybe connect with a parallel one along Mohammed bin Zayed Road. And I think if that was that would definitely alleviate traffic in these areas.
And speaking of commercial trophy deals, have you been a part of any, have you been a part of a trophy
I've sold
deal?
buildings. I've done some very big leases. I did a very big one in Standard Chartered, which was around 32,000 square foot for a blue chip, which was a fantastic deal. So I've done my fair share of deals over the years. I think my biggest lease, like I say, warehouse-wise, was about 180,000 square foot lease warehouse. Office space, probably 32,000 in one tenant. Sales, obviously, sold a building which was about, I think it sold for 188 million.
And aside from the higher commission that you get in commercial, is it common practice to get perks? Like, let's say you lease to a restaurant, do you get to dine there for free for life?
You'll quite often get invited to the opening. You'll quite often be able to, I've always been one of those a bit shy to go and say, hey, I leased you this place, give me a free cup of coffee. But you tend to find that you build a relationship with the guys. The problem here we've got is most of these retail outlets or restaurants aren't run with the people that are making decisions on the office space. So you do the deal with sort of a head of leasing or a leasing manager or somebody like that, but they never sit in the shop and the staff don't know you from Adam. So yes, the first time maybe for the opening or something like that, I don't think you get a book of repeat business from them.
Okay, all right, well.
Or you don't get a book of vouchers to go in and claim.
I would have enjoyed that part. So now it's me, the agent. Okay, and to wrap up, I want to know the best bit of career advice you've received and the best bit of career advice you'd like to give our golden.
I think my biggest one was obviously moving to commercial back in 2000 and when was it? 2006, end of 2006. I think if I hadn't done that, I'd probably be a residential agent. Maybe I'd be specialized in high-end residential. Been in commercial. I've sort of cross transactions in sales and lease in pretty much every asset class in Dubai. Never sold a school, never sold a hotel, but definitely moving into commercial, knowing that there's going to be business either way the market moves. If the market goes up, people are expanding. If the market goes down, companies are breaking leases and wanting to downsize. So we're always busy. And I say this to my agents, a family can't get rid of their kids because it's a down market. In commercial, companies will downsize. And when it comes down to headcount, if you half your headcount, you should be able to half your rent. So companies will always be moving and there will always be income in commercial real estate. So that's one of the things I've always liked about commercial. The fact that you're dealing with companies that make decisions that are black and white and they're not sort of, maybe we like it, maybe the kitchen tiles aren't wrong or the view's not quite right. We don't have those decisions. It typically, does it fit our criteria? Does it have the right amount of space for the people we need for our growth? And more to the point, does the fit out currently work or are we going to strip it out and start again?
So what does a viewing look like in commercial? It's just like open the gate, There you go.
Depending on the size of offices, some of them can be that, because if you look at some of the new offices that have opened in business space at 300 square foot, you sort of look at a 300 square foot office, it's literally open the door and you're like, well, we're at the other end now. Now what do we do? Depending on the size of the property. But a lot of clients, I find, you open the door, let them in, let them touch it, feel it, tell them about it. But a lot of them know what they're looking for. Yeah. You can see when the guy starts sitting there in the corner looking out the window, you can think he actually wants to sit in that window. He wants to be looking out that window as a view, and it makes it a lot easier to close the deal.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you for having me on.
It was a pleasure to have you on. My first commercial guest ever.
Hey!
So, yeah, if you could like, share, and subscribe, and any questions or comments, leave them down below, and Andrew and his lovely team will respond to them. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you very much.